Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we would do our fourth mixed haul. I've been all over the city collecting up stuff that I've collected over the last few weeks. I've done videos in between these ones of specific stuff, but there's auxiliary stuff that keeps piling up on my desk. And then when I went out the other day, went to a thrift store that had an amazing collection of great music on CD, which doesn't come along very often. Um, I may come across. I mean, you may you may get an individual CD here or there, or an individual LP here or there that you can pick up. That's a great classic LP or CD. Um, but you usually don't find a large amount of them, right? So somebody went into this thrift store and dumped off their CD collection. I guess they didn't want it anymore, and I picked up 20, but there was like 30, maybe 30 of them that were worth picking up, but probably 10 of them, around 10 of them were pretty scratched up and not in really great condition. So I kind of left them there. I'll mention what they are as I go through the CDs. I'm going to keep the CDs till last because I think that'll be the funnest part of the video. But yeah, it's like when I walked into the thrift store and I went to the section where the CDs are, and I go, normal, average stuff, like Shania Twain or that kind of super popular stuff, Rihanna, Beyonce, that kind of thing, right? So, um, Anne Murray, not that any of these artists are necessarily bad. It's just that you see these CDs everywhere, right? So either you already have them in your collection or you just don't collect them because you're not interested in them or whatever, right? But then you come along and then bang, wow, you don't see that or that one or that one. What the hell's going on here? There's like, and then you go, wow, and then I won't tell you what they are. I'll leave it to the end. But you do not find that type of CD collection unless somebody has actually like dumped their collection into a thrift store and they have good taste in music. And this person had really good taste in music. All right, so I'll leave that one till the end. But I got a bunch of stuff over the last couple of weeks, and I thought we'd go through it all. It's going to be a longer video, but some people enjoy shorter videos. Some people enjoy longer videos because they don't necessarily watch the video; they more listen to it, right? So like I like to do that at night. I'll listen to YouTube videos on the stuff that I like, and I'll fall asleep or whatever with my headphones on or my earbuds in or whatever, right? So this one's probably going to be a bit longer, but I went to um, a bunch of different thrift stores. I went to a record video store. I ordered some music. Sorry, I ordered uh, something online off of Amazon, and so I thought we'd go through it all, see what you think, or maybe you'll enjoy the video as much as I am doing it. All right. So first, I thought we'd okay. So altogether, what I have to show you is 20 CDs. There's 5 books, and there's 3 box sets, and there's 7 other films. All right. So um, I thought I'd go through them all, and let's see how it goes. All right. So I thought I'd do the books first. All right. So the first book I found was, excuse me, a paperback of The Pilgrim's Progress. All right. So um, if you don't know The Pilgrim's Progress, it was written back in the 1600s, late 1600s, if I remember correctly. If I'm mistaken, I'll just leave it down here. Um, and it's basically a Christian allegory. Basically, it's about a gentleman who leaves one city and goes to another city on a pilgrimage. Like, and that other city is heaven, really. So he's on a path to heaven. And this book shows you how the way that you live your life uh, will show you how to get into heaven, basically, right? So um, I did a short review on the last time I had this book in one of the videos, but that's basically it. It's a really interesting read. Whether you're Christian, whether you're religious, or whether you're not religious, it's an extremely good read because it goes. The person travels on the path and he meets these different people along the road or whatever, and these people represent different belief systems or emotions or things like that. So you may so he'll run into, let's say, hope, or he'll run into something to involve with ethics. I can't remember the name of all the different people that he runs into, but um, they're all like either emotions or moral things or whatever, right? So um, it's an extremely good read. Like I said, whether you're Christian or you're not Christian, but it's one of the early early Christian allegory books, and it's quite an interesting read. I already read it myself. So that's the Pilgrim's Progress. Next up is Starship Troopers, which came out in 1959, and this is the book that I'm reading presently. All right, so I picked this book up because I'm a fan of science fiction, but I don't read as much as I used to. As I'm getting older, my eyesight isn't as great, and my eyes will get tired or blurry um, quicker than they used to, right? And there's a period in my life between my mid 20s to my 40s that I basically read voraciously, right? And I don't know if that affected my eyesight, but once I hit around 40, I had to get glasses, and then it's my vision wasn't as good as it was when I was younger. But anyway, so I'm reading this book right now, and Starship Troopers. The reason why I picked that up was um, because I'm doing a series of videos about uh, books and movies. So usually it's the book, and then the movie is based on the book. But occasionally you'll have a movie, and then they'll make a book based on the movie. But usually it's the reverse. And I'm doing a series of videos on those. I've done one so far. That one was on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the film versus the play. All right, so the play was in book form, right? And so this is another one. I really enjoy the movie, so I thought I'd read the book, and then I'd compare the two, and that'll be a future video. So look forward to a video on Starship Troopers, all right, the book versus the movie, and which one is better, okay? So I'm about halfway through the book right now, and I'll finish the other half, and then I'll do the video, all right? So that's Starship Troopers. It's by Robert A. Heinlein. Is that how you pronounce his name? Ignorant intellectual, right? Heinlein, I think. Anyways, he's one of the bigger names in science fiction writing, and Starship Troopers is one of his better books, and it was put out in 1959. The movie came out in in the late 90s, 1997, I think. So, anyways, so that's Starship Troopers. Next up is probably my all-time favorite children's book. All right, and it came out in 1961. I found a nice hardcover version of it, and it's called James and the Giant Peach. Now, each of these books I found for $2 each, and this hardcover I found for $4. Um, and this story is one of my all-time favorite children's story. I read this book when I was a child in grade school, and I did a book report on it, and I quite enjoyed the film. Sorry, I quite enjoyed the book. Now, this looks um, the original artwork or the original drawings in this isn't in this book. This book has an updated drawing list. I guess it reminds me of the actual film that came out on this book as well. But I don't know if it's the same. I don't know if Lane Smith did the animation for the film or not, or they based the film on her, uh, based the animation of the film on her drawings in this book. I'm not sure, but um, what I know is this is one of the greatest children's books. When you speak of children's books, what I mean of the 20th century, like you can go back in time and then you'll get hundreds of children's books that are great. But in the 20th century, I think this one, especially the second half of the 20th century, this is probably the greatest children's novel of all time, up there with like Charlotte's Web by E.B. White and those books, right? So um, this tells the story of James, who's an orphan, who I think he lives with his aunts on top of the hill, and in the front yard is a peach tree, and this peach starts growing in it, and then it gets super huge. Um, and so he ends up being on this peach tree, and it snaps off and it rolls into the ocean, or it goes into the river and ends up in the ocean. Anyways, he goes on an adventure of these with these 7 bugs, There's a worm, there's a ladybug, there's other bugs in it, and they go on an adventure on the top of this peach, um, and it's quite a fun read. So if you haven't read that, read it. There is some issues, I think, in this book. There has been some critics of it saying there's some sections in it that might be inappropriate for some children, but I didn't go in depth on what those were because I read this as a kid and it didn't bother me. There was nothing in it that frightened me or anything. So I'm not sure what they were referring to. But if you want to do an investigation and see before you read this book to your children, go ahead. But there's basically two books by Dahl. I mean, there's more that there's like a bunch of them, but Matilda would be one that would. But his two main ones are James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Those two are probably his best children's works, right? All right, so that's James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, and it came out in 1961. Next up is an older book from 1868, and it's one of the first modern detective novels, all right? And so when people investigate detective fiction or they want to read detective fiction and they go back in time, they'll read Sherlock Holmes and they'll read this book by Wilkie Collins, and it's called The Moonstone. And basically, this is the forerunner to the modern detective novel, right? And a lot of the tropes and everything used in this kind of put up the parameter for a lot of the writings that happened later uh, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, in the 1900s, right? So this basically came out in 1868, and it basically surrounds the Moonstone, which is it's a diamond um, from India that a British, I think he was in the army. Don't quote me on that, but I think he was a military guy that was stationed in India, and he brought that stone out of India back to England, and I think he died or he gave it in his inheritance to his daughter, and his daughter wore it at a party, and it was stolen from her because it was like on a necklace, and it was stolen from her, and then the detective part of this thing is when they go investigate and try to find that diamond. And this is I have not read this book, but I've read many a review on it, and I'm not a huge detective fiction reader. That's probably why I haven't read this yet. But if you are a fan of detective fiction and you haven't read this book, I think maybe your inventory of books that you've read is a bit lacking. So maybe you should pick this up. And everybody that I've ever talked to who've read this book said it's quite an enjoyable read. It's a 19th century book from 1868, but the language in it isn't very much different than it is now. It's not like modern language now compared to, let's say, Shakespearean language, right? No, it's similar language to us, so you don't really have to worry about not understanding reading it. And it's one of the great detective fiction books. Now it's part of what's called the Penguin English Library. If you see there, I'm not sure where the camera is. Uh, Maybe it shows better there. All right. So this, if you notice the spine, if you go into here in Canada, if you go into Chapters or Indigo or other bookstores, independent bookstores in your area, um, you'll find a lot of books that are part of the Penguin English Library. Now, the Penguin English Library, just quickly, um, was an imprint of Penguin that started in the later, I think, 1968, but it was in the late 60s, and it was a companion uh, imprint to their Penguins Classics. Now, the Penguins Classics, when they first started out, were basically um, non-English classics, from Greek myths to philosophy to, you know, older nonfiction or fiction books from around the world outside of England, um, translated into English, and they called it the Penguin Classics. And what happened was, alongside that Penguins Classics, they came out with the Penguin English Library alongside it. So they would have non-English writers and then English writers, all right, beside each other, all right. So, but then what happened is by the 1980s, mid 80s, they kind of combined both imprints and kept it as the Penguins Classic. So, so they combined the two and just kept the Penguins classics. And this is in the mid '80s. And then what happened is just recently, actually, in the mid 2010s, I think it was 2013 or 2014, somewhere around there, they split it off again, and now they're doing the English library again. All right, so a lot of the great English novels, English literature, are in these type of editions now. Right, they're not paperback size. They're larger. Right, here's a paperback compared to them. Right, but they're not like the average size of a hardcover. Right, so they're kind of in between. But you know the library itself is a really great library, and it's fun to collect and read as well. So it's called the Penguin English Library. All right. So that's the Moonstone, and now the last book is a Canadian book, and it was published in 1981, and it's done by Margaret Atwood. Here's Margaret Atwood if you haven't seen her before. Um, she's my vote for the greatest Canadian writer of all time. All right. So she's been writing since the the 60s, and she's still writing today. All right. So and her books are extremely good. Like probably her greatest novel that she's ever written, at least in my opinion, is The Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, that Handmaid's Tale, the one that was made into a movie um, in the 80s, if I remember correctly, late 80s, early to mid. Anyways, I'll put it down here. And the TV show that's out now, or it's been out in the last 5, 10 years or whatever, right? So that's probably her best book. Her second best book is probably maybe a toss up between Surfacing and The Edible Woman, but I would choose The Edible Woman. That is a great book. I would suggest any if you have any daughter, you should have her read that book. It's extremely good. It's all about traditional to more modern values when it comes to women, right? So when I read it, I was blown away by it. So um, and Servicing is another great book by her, and this one is also another good one. So this one's called Bodily Harm, and it came out in 1981. Now this book quickly is about a woman writer. She writes like uh, food reviews and food and other things for a newspaper. She ends up going through some tragedy in her life. I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was a divorce or a separation or something along those lines. And she decided to take a break and go on vacation. And she ended up going to, I think it was in the Caribbean. Let me read here. See, I won't hold you up on this. Yeah. To recuperate, she flies to the tiny Caribbean island of Saint Antoine. Now, the problem with Saint Antoine, when she went there, and she meets a guy there and has kind of a romance, but he's kind of like a revolutionary, and a whole civil war kind of breaks out, and now it goes from her being on vacation to her trying to survive, like um, you know, hence the bodily harm part, right? And it's I have not read this, but all the reviews that I've read and everybody that I've spoken to who have read this said that this is a pretty good book, right? So I may read it, but the reason why I picked it up and it was $4 was this is a first edition book of a Margaret Atwood book put out in 1981. I found a nice first edition of it, right? I mean, it's a little bit beat up, but um, it's still in really good condition, right? But the problem with it is, and this is a complaint I have about. Let me do a little complaint here about thrift stores. All right, so um, the thrift stores in my area, okay, um, some of them, anyways. This one in particular that I picked that book up at, like to put stickers on their products. Pricing stickers. Okay, so I understand you want to price something so that people know how much it costs, but in this thrift store, every softcover book is $1.99. Every hardcover book is $3.99. Every children's book is is 99 cents. Okay, and every CD is $1.99. All right. Every DVD is $2.99, and every Blu-ray is $3.99. All right. So in that media, every one of these, oh, and every box set, a box set like a group of DVDs or you know, a trilogy and a box set of a book or whatever is $5.99. All right. So when you walk in and they have the signs up over each one of these shelves to tell you what the pricing of them are, yet they still go around and they put stickers using a sticker gun or whatever, and they tag every one of them. All right, with the pricing on them. All right. And I don't know who it's for. Maybe they have high turnover at the place, and so they need to. People don't know what their pricing is in the store or whatever. The people that work there, but I doubt that. And everybody that buys can't help but see those signs. So why waste money and time and labor putting stickers on these items? It just doesn't make any sense. Okay, um, you're creating labor that doesn't need to be created. You're creating work and you have to buy the stickers and costs and everything else when everything is the same price throughout the whole thing, yet they do it. And what happens is with books, let's say like this book or older books like this one's 40 years old, right? I know they don't know what they have. All right, I mean their pricing structure is that way for a reason. It's to have turnover and have people buy the stuff so that they can use that money to help less fortunate people and employ people inside the store and have people come in and be able to buy affordable clothing and things like that if they're not like well off or whatever, right? So I understand that. I grew up that way myself. So why create the extra cost with the stickers? But just for a personal thing is they put a 3.99 sticker on this on the spine, and I know they didn't know that this is a very good edition of one of Margaret Atwood's first editions. All right, and I know that they don't know that this is a first edition. But anyways, they put a sticker on it, and then when you take the sticker off, it damaged this, right? So I just don't understand because it seems kind of pointless because every sticker that they put on, a customer after they buy the product, they're going to pull that sticker off. All right, they're not going to leave it on it, right? Um, and it just wrecks the stuff that they're selling, right? So um, that was just a little tirade of mine that a nice first edition book that could be in somebody's collection is now damaged. And it's not worth very much anymore, right? So anyway, so that's a bit of a bitching over now. All right, so um, anyway, so that's 1981's Margaret Atwood's Bodily Harm. All right. So that's the books. Let's move on to the movies. All right. So let's do this one first. Okay. So I went on Amazon and I saw that. Okay. I can't remember if I saw it in a video or just from emails because I subscribe to all the different boutique cinema emails and they send you upcoming titles or whatever. Anyways, I saw that Arrow has put out uh, an Al Pacino film, a William Friedkin film from 1980, and it's called Cruising. And I saw it on Amazon, and it was under $20. So I said, "Cool, I'm going to buy it." Right. Um, so I did. I bought it. There it is. There. All right. Um, and this movie by William Friedkin came out in 1980, like I said. And Friedkin is the guy that did, The French Connection, that great film from when was that? Mid 70s. I think it was in the mid 70s. And The Exorcist, another 70s film. That's my vote for the all-time greatest horror film is The Exorcist. And so he did The French Connection. He did The Exorcist and a bunch of other films. He's a director that I collect. I have a section for him over there of his films. But I did not have Cruising. And I went, that's sorely lacking from my catalog, and I've been looking for it for years. I saw it back in the day when it came out. I think I was like in my teens when I saw it, and uh, it was definitely different than any other film I saw. That's why it always, kept in my head. And seeing Al Pacino in 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 this film, went, wow, this guy has really good range, right? So anyways, this film is basically about Al Pacino plays a cop, a new cop, uh, just out of the academy or whatever, and they put him in. There's a serial killer going around killing gay men, if I remember correctly, because I haven't seen it since the 1980s. Um, and and so they put Al Pacino in that um, milieu undercover to go search out the serial killer who's killing gay men. If I remember, it's gay men they were killing. Anyways, it's the gay S&M culture at the time. It puts it on film, right? So he goes into that culture to try to find a serial killer, and it's quite an interesting film. Um, and I found it on an Arrow video, but it was under $20. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought it. And but it when it came, I was a bit disappointed because it doesn't come with it. There's no booklet in this, right? So um, I know that Arrow, when they put out their first printing of a title that they've decided to, you know, do a 1080 restoration of it or a 4K restoration, they'll usually put it out in a nice box set, and they'll come with a booklet and maybe a case and everything else, and then maybe they'll put it out like this, but there'll be a booklet inside it. But this one doesn't have it, so I don't know if it ever did come with a booklet. Maybe you can tell me. Did Cruising, when Arrow first put this out, did it have a booklet with it? Because I don't. I checked online. I don't see any booklet for this. So maybe it never did come out with a booklet. Now it does have a great amount of special features in it. So, it's got a 4K scan restoration. All right, and they put it out in high definition Blu-ray at 1080. All right, and a newly remastered 5.1 DTS HD master audio, supervised by William Friedkin, right? And a history of cruising. So they have audio commentary by Friedkin, and a bunch of other, there's some documentaries in here as well. So Arrow did a good job in putting this out. It's just that there's no booklet with it. I like it. Okay, like if you get a Criterion, right, and it doesn't have a booklet, you know that the booklet's missing, right? But some of the other, um, boutique cinema labels put out films with booklets, and then they'll put out films without booklets. So you never know when you're buying them, like on the secondary market, whether they actually came, unless you do some investigation, whether they came with a booklet or they didn't come with a booklet. And it is my humble opinion that if it doesn't come with a booklet, it should be a lot less of a price, right? So if they're putting out the film for, let's say, $25 with a booklet, if later editions of it don't have a booklet, then the price should drop significantly, right? Um, in my opinion, anyway. So if this has a booklet version of it and it's priced the same as this non-booklet version of it, well, obviously I'd rather have the booklet. But anyways, it's an interesting film. Like I haven't watched it since it first came out, so I'm gonna have to revisit it and see whether I like it now or not, right? So there's a different culture, you know, cultural attitude towards gay men back in the the 70s and the 80s than there is now, like 40 years later, right? Uh, and I'm wondering how this film reflects like the 1980s cultural ideas, the mainstream cultural ideas on gay men and gay sexuality in general, right? So I want to revisit that because I watched it when I was in my teens, and now I'm a lot older than my teens. Let's put it that way, and I like to see how it is, how it holds up. If you have seen this movie, like I did back when it first came out, I saw it on VHS when I was living in Montreal. They had a VHS store around the corner from where I live. And I got it and I watched it because I was a fan of Al Pacino. And and you've seen it back then, and now you've watched it now. What do you think of the difference of what you thought of it then to what you thought of it now? If you've done that, leave it in the comments or whatever. Maybe we can have a discussion about it. What do you think of the film itself? If you're straight, what do you think of the film? And if you're a gay man and you've seen this, what do you think of this film? Is it insulting towards you? Is it representative? What do you think? Um, I'm not sure, but I'll have to watch it again, like I said. But leave any comments that you have below, and maybe we can get into a discussion about it. Right? All right. So that's Cruising. Came out in 1980, directed by William Friedkin. All right. So the next thing I found um, was at the used record store that also has videos and CDs and everything else in it. It's my favorite one, the one that's in the downtown area of my city. All right. I went to a. There's another one that's in the west side that I picked up. The second Jack Reacher film on a Blu-ray DVD combo steelbook, and I paid like $14 for it. And the reason why I like the one that's downtown more is here's another perfect example of a nice steelbook, a Blu-ray DVD combo steelbook of Hannah, which is another film that I really enjoyed. And it was $6.95 plus tax. So instead of being 12 plus tax, it was $6.95. All right. So you can understand why I like the one downtown more than the one that's in the West End, right? Anyway, so I've already put this one in plastic. So this is how easy it is if you get plastic bags to protect your steelbooks so they don't scratch easily, right? That's how easy it is to take out, right? Okay, so here it is. Here's the back. There's the inside. It's a nice steelbook. It's not um, has a Blu-ray and a DVD, which if you've watched my videos, you know that I really enjoy Blu-ray DVD combos. And if I ever go up to a 4K, like get a 4K TV. I mean, most of my TVs are pretty new, so they're going to last me a while. So I probably won't buy a 4K TV for years to come. So I don't really collect 4K films because of that, and I'm not going to spend thousands of dollars to upgrade. All right, so I like the Blu-ray DVD combos. But if I do get a 4K TV and a 4K player or whatever, then what I'll probably enjoy is the Blu-ray 4K um, editions, right? So anyway, so that's what it looks like in the plastic. See how nice it looks? And when you put it on your shelf, pull it off your shelf, put it on your shelf, you're just rubbing back and forth the plastic. You're not actually rubbing the steelbook itself. So these steelbooks are so notoriously easily scratched. It's hard to keep them in good condition if you don't put them in plastic. All right. So I highly suggest that you do that. All right. So Hannah itself came out in 2011. And if you haven't seen the TV show either, I think it's a Netflix show. It's pretty good as well. All right. So if you, I watched the first season of it, and I haven't watched it since because I've been getting more and more into movies. But the first season that I watched of Hannah was very good. So, but it's based on this film, all right, which came out in 2011, and this is basically about um, an undercover government agency that's working on enhancing human beings, and they gave pregnant women. They went around recruiting around the country, pregnant women, uh, usually poor or whatever, give them money to take a drug, if I remember correctly, and that drug is supposed to affect their fetus and create a stronger or more ableized human being, better brain, better reflexes, better everything, right? So they did that, but there was side effects, and they actually took the kids away from the mother after she gave birth. Anyways, there was a whole bunch of, let's say, unethical things going on in this clandestine group or whatever. And one of the agents in it decided that he couldn't take that anymore because he kind of fell in love with one of the women that were in that study, I think. Anyway, so he ended up taking that baby out of the facility and went on the run with her, and that's her. That's Hannah, right? So, and what they do is they end up holding up in a forest and living off the land, and he basically teaches her how to survive off the land and how to fight, martial arts, uh, way of thinking, everything. He basically became her trainer and her father at the same time. Basically he's not her father biologically, but he kind of takes that role and teaches her and keeps her away from society. because he knows that once either him or her go into society, they're going to be picked up, they're going to be found, and the program, I think it was exposed, and so they shut it down, and they made it even more black. Anyway, so she's in the forest. She grows up from being a child all the way up to a teenager, and then you know how teenagers are. They want to go explore, and she kind of goes out into the world, and he hopefully prepares her for it, and then all shit breaks loose, right? So it's quite a fun film, and it it qualifies as one of my favorite types of films, which is a lead character who's a female in an action or like a action adventure not book sorry action adventure film, or like a spy film, or any type of film where usually the lead character is male. I like to see female roles in that, and I like to watch. Basically, I like to watch women kick ass in film, right? So this is one of my favorite types of films where you have a lead character who's female and goes kick some ass, right? So it's called Hannah. Came out in 2011, and it was directed by I don't know who directed this. Joe Wright. It was directed by Joe Wright. All right. So that's Hannah and Steelbook. All right. Oh, so next up is the second thing I got from that place. All right, the used record store, and it's the collector Blu-ray edition, 2-disc edition, put out by Sony Pictures in Columbia, of the Bridge on the River Kwai. Right. All right. So it stars William Holden, Alec Guinness, and Jack Hawkins, and actually, I think Alec Guinness won a Academy Award for this, and I think maybe this film won the Academy Award as well. It won a bunch of them, anyways. So they put out a really nice box set of this film. Sony did, and it's a really beautiful edition. It's basically a book. All right, it's shaped like a book. All right, there's really nice pictures to it, nice imagery. You open it up, it has 2 discs. All right, it has the Blu-ray disc on the front and the DVD on the back. So there's the back. It's the DVD. I love Blu-ray DVDs, right? So, um, and there's the Blu-ray. All right, and it comes with a booklet, but the booklet is actually attached to the book. So this is basically a book with DVDs in it, right? So, or with discs in it, right? And then, all right, so it has nice imagery, nice pictures, and uh, and then it also has your postcards. All right, it's still in the postcards are still in the plastic wrap, so I'm not going to take them out. I'll just leave them like that. But it's a bunch of posts, and an ad for Turner Classic Movies, and there's a sleeve in here that this goes into, right? So there's a sleeve right there. All right, so it's nicely. All right, so this is the bridge over the River Kwai. All right, and basically this film is about. Um, it's directed by David Lean, and David Lean, he did. I wrote a list of his films because I collect him as a director. But when I need to make lists in my head, they go out, right. So he did Lawrence of Arabia, which I also reviewed in a previous video. Oliver Twist, which is one of my favorite musicals. Doctor Zhivago, A Passage to India. All right. Um, so he did a bunch of great films, right? So and this is another one of his, right? So this one I think won like five or seven Oscars, winner of 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor. Alec Guinness, The Bridge on the River Kwai. All right, so 7 Oscars it won. So basically, it tells the story of a Japanese internment camp for British soldiers in World War II, and they're used as slave labor to build a bridge across um, this river, and they're dying through attrition, right? So the Japanese are working them hard and they're dying because of it. And so it goes from there. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to wreck it for you, but that's basically the premise. You have a POW camp in Japan, and they're building a bridge across a river, and a lot of them are dying due to this uh, labor or whatever, and so I think they do a revolt or whatever. Anyway, so it's I haven't seen the movie in decades, but it's one of the great David Lean films, and I collect David Lean as a director. So when I saw a nice edition like that of it, I decided to pick it up. All right, and because it's in a nice box set and it's paper, I thought I'd show you what I do to protect these. Now, usually what I just do is a 6x9 bag like this, which just slides in and you flip it over and you take the plastic off and you tape it, right? So that's what I usually do. But this one is too big, like it's too thick to fit in a 6x9 bag. So what you do is you get a 7x10 bag, all right? Is this a 7x10? No, it's not. There it is. All right. So here's a 7x10 bag, all right? And what you do is you put it in a 7x10 bag instead of a 6x9 bag. Now, with the 6x9 bags, um, they're perfectly made for Blu-rays and DVDs because they slide in basically firm. All right, the plastic is basically hugging the film, right? The problem is when you get all the different box sets and everything, they're all different sizes, and you get bags to fill them. Usually they don't fit exactly. There's usually space. So for example, you notice this part here. So it's a little bit larger. So it's a little bit large for a seven. The bag 7x10 is a little bit large for this, but the 6x9 is too small for it. So you use the 7x10. So what do you do? You could leave it like that, but what happens over time is the plastic will crumple and when you're moving it off the shelf, this part of the bag will come forward and you won't be able to read it very well. What you want the the bag to do is basically hug your film. All right. So how do you get it to do that? All right. So what you do is you put the bag in center so that the side of the bag, the line of the side of the bag goes down the center of the box. All right, on both sides. All right, and then you push it like I like to. Uh, Depending on which side you want to show on your shelves, do you want to show the movie side of it or do you want to show the back of the box side? I like to show the back of the box side because it's more uniform and it looks much nicer when it's on the shelf. This looks better, in my opinion, than that. All right, and you'll see it on most box sets are that way, where the back of the box set looks nicer than the front. All right, and this part of the box is also exposed to the front of your shelf, and you're moving stuff around it and you're hitting it. So this the outline of the box itself will get damaged from you moving it in a if you have it this way, it doesn't really damage it because it's one full piece of the box, right? There's not like a separation to it, right? So I prefer to put this one. So what I'll do is I'll slide it so that it looks like that. It's in dead center, and then you put it down and you take the plastic off of it. All right, and you do like you do with the 6x9 bags. You put it over. All right, and then you lift that side of it so you can push all the air out. All right. All right. So now all the air is out of it. All right. Now you seal it. All right, so now you have it in a sealed bag, but as you notice, you can slide it back and forth in this bag, right? So it's going to get crumpled, the bag is, and it's going to look not as nice, right? Um, so what you do is you push it. I like to push it to the back of the box, right? And now that you have it at the back of the box, you get some tape. All right, I use invisible tape. All right, you take a bit of it, you slide it back. All right, and there's always these little pieces here, right? Because it's in the center of the bag, you'll get like little lips coming out off the four corners. So what you're going to do is you're going to close that lip onto the bottom of the box, and you're going to tape it. All right. And then you're going to do the same thing on that side to the top. All right. So you're going to You're going to squeeze it so that it's tight against the back of the box. All right. And then you're going to grab that, fold it over. So now you fold that plastic lip over and you're going to tape it. All right. So now that's what the front of the box looks like. All right. So it's it's flush against the plastic and you can easily read it. But what do you do with this flimsy thing on the back, right? Well, you have to secure that as well. Otherwise, it's going to move front and forward. And the tape that you do on the top and the bottom is just going to expose a box that ends up, the plastic will look rectangular, but then it'll get squished and wrinkled or whatever, right? So you need to, make it so that it stays where it is, right? So you do the exact same thing you did on the other side. All right. So what you do is you pull these sides to get them uh, flush, and then you fold it dead center. All right. When you fold it dead center, you're going to create two more of these lips at the end, right? And you tape that corner. All right. And you tape this corner. All right. So you get another piece of plastic. All right. You fold it over, and then you have that lip right there. And you tape it. All right. So now, hardly any air. There's still a little bit of air. You can't really avoid a little bit of air inside the bag for this, but now look, it's flush, right? So if you wanted it to look like that, you could. For this side, you would just reverse the box inside the bag when you're taping it. All right. Now, the only issue with this is that once you use tape, all right, this bag will the tape is going to yellow over time, but it's going to take years to do it. But this, as long as it's in this uh, bag, it's basically safe. You're not going to scratch it. You're not going to peel it or anything, and it's not exposed to your environment in your house. It's it's sealed, right? But the issue is that you now won't be able to watch it unless you pull the pieces of tape off, all right, and then reverse the process, all right. And sometimes that's irritating for some people, so they go, screw it, I don't want to do it, and they just leave the box out exposed to the world. And what happens is this white on this box will eventually turn yellow and brown. It will take years for it to do it, depending. If you're a smoker, it'll turn yellow a lot quicker. And if you're a smoker, I highly suggest that you take all of your media. It doesn't matter what media you have, and put it into plastic bags so that when your product's yellow, it's not the actual product that's yellowing, it's the plastic bag, and you just throw the bag out and get a new one, right? Um, the bags are cheap, 5 to 10 cents each, right? So, um, anyways, so now this looks nice. It's going to go on the shelf like that. All right, like that, and it's going to look really nice. All right, so that's the Bridge over the River Kwai, one of the great films from the 1950s, right? So, all right, and now it's protected in the plastic. All right, I also did that with this one. All right, which I got from a pawn shop um, in the eastern section of town. There's a pawn shop um, where I get my car. When I get a oil change for my car, or change into my winter tires or whatever, there's a pawn shop down the street from it. So I'll usually just drop my car off at the dealership and they'll do the thing for me, and then I'll just go to the pawn shop and take a look. And they had this there. All right. So this is the Men in Black trilogy on Blu-ray and Ultra HD. All right. So I'm not going to open it because I'll have to rip the bag apart, like I said with this one, right? But basically, there's 6 discs in here. It's the 3 movies. Um, there's not a lot of there's not like booklets or anything. They're basically 3 digipack films stacked. So you have 2 discs. You have the Blu-ray disc, and then you have the Ultra HD Blu-ray disc, one stacked on top of each other. So you have 3 booklets, basically 3 digipacks with 2 discs in each digipack. And the box set is really nice. It's a thick, hard cardboard like this one. All right. So I love it because they last a lot longer than those flimsy cardboard ones. But you still protect it. So as you see, I took it, I put it in a bag the same size as that one. I taped the top, I taped the bottom, and now it goes on the shelf looking like that. But you could reverse the box inside the bag and have all 3 of the movies showing. but I think that looks much cleaner and much nicer on a shelf, like this, right? Rather than like that. Okay, this looks much nicer in my opinion. And if you don't mind wrecking, if if Men in Black is like your all-time favorite film and you're going to watch it a lot, then I would suggest you not put this in the bag. Or if you're going to get the nice collector's edition, I paid $15 for this, so it was like $5 a Blu-ray, I guess. I also have this on DVD as well, so I'm covered for this now. So until I upgrade to 4K or whatever, right? But if you're going to put this in a bag and you're going to tape it like I do, if it's one of your favorite films, I would say still use a plastic bag. But if you're pulling it on and off the shelf all the time, you don't mind it looking like the bag all crumpled up and wrinkly and everything, and doesn't look all that great on the shelf. Then just put it in the bag itself. Don't leave it out of the bag. Put it in the bag and let the bag be a bit loose on it, and put it on your shelf that way. That way you're protecting it and you can access it by just pulling the bags back up, pulling it out, and then you can just re put it down because these sticky stripes on the bag will last probably around five times before it kind of loses its stickiness and kind of starts coming off or whatever, right? So, um, but I would still suggest you put it in a plastic bag rather than just leave it naked on your shelf because you're going to damage it. All right, so that's Men in Black trilogy. Do I have to explain the Men in Black trilogy? Let's see. Men in Black came out in 1997. All of them were directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. All right. Uh, Men in Black 2 came out in 2002, and then Men in Black 3 came out in 2012. So there's the first two were the main films for it, and then they decided to revisit it like a decade later or whatever, right? So for the third film, right? And then they came out with an international version, Men in Black International, if I remember correctly, a little bit later on after that. But the core of Men in Black are the first two films, and basically the first film is they uh, they introduce you to the characters, they introduce you to the world of Men in Black, and then they go after this bug in human form that's going to take over the world. And they go kill it or whatever, right? So it's fun. And then um, the the Tommy Lee Jones um, character in the film decides that he's retiring from the Men in Black, and so he gets them to erase his memory, and he ends up becoming a post office manager clerk in a post office in Ohio or somewhere in the rural United States, and he doesn't remember his years in the Men in Black. And then the second film starts off with Laura Flynn Boyle landing on the planet, and she's after the light of Zartha, if I remember correctly. I think it's the light of Zartha, and she's on the planet to go get it. And the only one who knows where it is the Tommy Lee Jones character, and his memory's been erased. So Will Smith, his partner, goes to get him and to un lobotomize him or whatever they did with him, so that he can remember where this light of Zartha is. And Laura Flynn Boyle um, is going around trying to find the light of Zartha, and she goes in and takes over the Men in Black headquarters and everything. Anyway, it's a fun film. The first two films are very much fun. The third film, what was the third film about? Oh yeah, it's about a guy that Tommy Lee Jones cut off his arm. He's like an alien. He comes back. He goes back in time to erase that event from happening, where he ends up in jail on the moon, and he loses his arm because Tommy Lee Jones, uh, you know, uh, took out took took out his arm and jailed him or whatever, right? So he escapes from jail. He gets a time machine, goes back in time and cancels that. And Will Smith ends up getting in this time loop of some sort where no, he he ends up in a reality where um, it's not the right reality. So he goes back in time to fight the other guy that went back in time. You know what I mean? Anyways, it's a bit confusing, the time shifts and everything in it, but that's basically the story of Men in Black 3. But it's the first two that are the best, and both of them are really great. And then the third one was kind of like an add-on that they decided to go, but let's have some nostalgia and go back and do another one, right? But at the 20th anniversary, which was what, 2017? Well, if it came out in 1997, 2000, yeah. So 2017, this came out, um, and has all the three movies on it, and it's a nice box set. All right, so that's that. Next up is this set that I found at a thrift shop for like $2.99, and it's Screen Legends. They're DVDs. It's four films starring Bing Crosby. All right, and my education is a bit lacking when it comes to Bing Crosby was one of the big names in the song and dance films back in the 30s and 40s. Um, I've only seen one of these films, which is Holiday Inn, and the reason why I saw that was because I was taking a look at Fred Astaire, and he happened to be in Holiday Inn. Now Bing Crosby is also in Holiday Inn, so I have this one actually on an individual DVD. The other three I don't have. So, which are Road to Zanzibar, which came out in 1944, and Going My Way, which came out Road to Zanzibar came out in 1941. Going My Way came out in 1944. Holiday Inn came out in 1942, and then Pennies from Heaven came out in 1936. So there's four films in this on DVD, and it's basically a box set with the four films, right? So that's cool. Um, so I'll watch me some musical dance films from the 1940s. Actually, I did try to watch these films already because they were in a group of films that I was trying to watch before I did uh, a video on them. But I've, this is actually Region Two, the Region Two disc. So this probably came from England, um, and I didn't realize it. Now I don't have a Region Two or Region B Blu-ray player, so how I watch these films, because I have a lot of them in my collection, is I will transfer them into digital files onto my laptop so I can watch them, right? So that's usually what I do with these films, and I haven't done that with this one yet. So when I do, I'll watch these films. So this is another box set, so I will put this in a bag, watch the films, and then I'll seal it like The Men in Black or The Bridge Over the River Kwai that I did. All right. So the next one up is The Thrill of It All, which came out in 1963. All right. And this is a Norman Jewison film, and that's the reason why I saw this. And I like Rock Hudson, who's that guy, because I remember him from the 70s and 80s. He was in a TV show called The Rockford Files, right? Which was a fun watch when I was a kid. I used to watch The Rockford Files. So when I saw that he was there, and then I checked to see who directed this film when I was in the pawn shop that I was in, not the pawn shop, the thrift store that I was in. It was Norman Jewison, and I really like Norman Jewison. He did like And Justice for All. He did In the Heat of the Night, which is one of my all-time favorite films. Um, he did a lot of them. He's he's Canadian as well. So him like with uh, James Cameron are probably the two most successful Canadian more mainstream filmmakers, James Cameron and Norman Jewison, for Canadian directors. I mean, you got David Cronenberg, but he was more of a niche guy in the horror when he first started doing the films. Um, but like History of Violence was more of a mainstream film. But a lot of his earlier films were, you know, uh, more niche films, right? So a lot of people they didn't hit the mainstream. Let's put it that way. Unlike a lot of Norman Jewison films and James Cameron films do, right? So I collect Norman Jewison, so I found this and I just watched it, and this is a friggin' hilarious film. I'm sorry, but this is a great film. It came out in 1963. Stars Doris Day and James Gardner. All right, basically they're a married couple. He's a doctor and she's a housewife. All right, and she ends up becoming a star on in television commercials for soap, which kind of disrupts James Garner's life, and because they have two kids or whatever, and they have a like a nanny to help or whatever. But she ends up becoming like this famous television personality during the film, and it just makes their life more and more complicated and funny at the same time. But there's one section in this film that made me laugh out loud, and that was when they were arguing going up the stairs, and um, she was arguing that um, his money is his money and her money is their money, right? Which is kind of the opposite of what usually people argue, with the with feminism and women's rights and everything is uh, it was an argument on the opposite side of what feminism all is about. And basically, this is a film where it's adjusting to women being in the workforce, not just being stay-at-home moms. And it kind of takes that whole dynamic uh, at the time of that, right? So he's a well-established doctor. He has a nice life. He has a nice house. He has a nice housewife. He has two good kids. And then she ends up becoming uh, a famous television personality, right? And it screws everything up. And basically, she's earning more money than him because of you earn a lot of money in television, and it's all that juxtaposition. So it's really fun. It's really funny how they poke fun at that, the changing reality of coupledom, of marriage, when women are more going into the workforce and earning money and being more independent and everything, right? So, and how men have to adjust to it. So it's called The Thrill of It All, and it's a great film by Norman Jewison. All right, and this, even though it's a DVD, all right, I know people don't collect DVDs anymore, or a lot of people don't. I still do, because a lot of DVDs have not been put onto Blu-ray yet, or 4K. And for me, it's access to the film that I want more than the way the film is coming to you, right? So um, next up is a Spencer Tracy film from 1950. All right, so this film, all right, is also a comedy. All right, and it's directed by Vincent. I always have a hard time with his name. Vincent Minnelli. He's basically Lisa Minnelli um, father. All right, and he directed a bunch of films, but he's most famous for Gigi and An American in Paris. You know that Fred Astaire musical. I think it was it Fred Astaire? I think it was Fred Astaire. If I'm wrong, I'll correct myself here. Um, and he did a. So this is basically, it stars Spencer Tracy as the dad, and he has a daughter who gets involved with the man, and they're going to get married. And because he's the father of the bride, he's the one that has to take care of the wedding. And it's all the funniness that could be involved, all the frustration and all the everything has to be planned and everything else, and all the craziness of it. And Elizabeth Taylor is very young in this film, and she just lights up. It's in black and white, and she just lights up the screen. It's just ridiculous how much film, like the magnetism of Elizabeth Taylor on film, it's just ridiculous, um, all through her career, right? So, and this is no exception. So she plays the daughter. She's like 20 in this film, um, and she's getting married, and the father has to host the wedding and plan the wedding, and it went from a small wedding into a big huge church wedding, and he's all freaking out. And Spencer Tracy is a great a great actor, so it's quite fun. It's not as funny as this one, but it is funny, right? And he narrates the the detract if there is a detraction to this film, for me anyways, is that a lot of it's narrated. He narrates through the film, and where it worked with Old Man in the Sea, another film by that Spencer Tracy starred in. It's called The Old Man in the Sea. He narrated that one as well, but he narrates this film, and I guess you couldn't really do this film without that narration, because it does move the plot along. It does um, tell you what he's thinking inside of his head or whatever. But those films to you, don't they come off as a bit lazy? You know what I mean? Where instead of showing you the progression of the film, they narrate it, and it takes care of some of the, the movement of the film, right? So it's a bit lazy, I find, but that's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. So, anyways, my main attraction to this was that Manelli, what's his first name, Vincente Manelli directed this, but also because of Elizabeth Taylor starring in it, right? I really enjoy Elizabeth Taylor. And now this is a snapper case, which was quite popular back in the 90s. All right, so they're made of paper. It's all paper with a bit of a plastic shell on the outside of one side of the paper, right? And it closes like that. It goes like. But these things are notorious for browning and falling apart over time if you don't take care of them. Now this one has survived incredibly well, um, um, since it was put out. So it's in still very nice condition. So I want to keep it in that condition. I was just looking for imperfections on it, and there isn't any, which is quite surprising for a snapper case that came out like 30 years ago, right? So the person that had this probably had it in storage and didn't touch it, right? But what I do with these is I put them in plastic. So I'll put this one in plastic as well. Um, these ones, the 6x9 cases, make it really, really tight for these to fit in, but you can if you take time on it. But there's also another 6x9 um, plastic bag that works well, but it doesn't have the glue, the glue strip back to it. It's just a, a regular plastic bag, right? And I use those mostly for the snapper cases, even though they're a bit, you know, they're exposed at the top, but that's kind of plastic, so you'll be okay with it, right? And they fit nicely, and you don't the 6x9, the regular ones, you have difficulty trying to put them in, and they're extremely tight. So I prefer the this other bag that I found, um, and there you go. Right. So that's Father of the Bride. All right. And now we get to the last. Oh no, sorry. There's these two films. All right. So we have 1974's The Street Fighter, directed by Shigehiro Azawa, and I've been looking for this film for for years. All right, and I think Arrow put out a like a box set of the Street Fighter films. Okay, I'll put it up here. It's a nice box set, but it's quite expensive. I'll put the price as well. If I find a price on it, I'll put the price here as well on that box set. And when they announced that they were going to put out the Street Fighter films in a box set, I think it was Arrow. I mean, I could be wrong. It could be like, but I think it was Arrow. It's one of the boutique Blu-rays, like I said. Um, uh, it made me, damn, I wish I could find that film. And just like not even a few days later, I find this film in a in a pawn shop for like $3 or whatever. So this is the Platinum Disc Corporation's issue of this. And now I wrote down what these guys are because I've never heard of them before. So they're called the Platinum Disc Corporation, and they're out of Michigan. They started business in 1995. They're basically low budget um, public domain films is what they usually put out, but they put them all out in these plastic cases. All right, the clear plastic cases, which look nice, but they kind of look strange on your shelf because all the other DVDs are like, the regular plastic DVDs with the with the wraparound covers, right? So these ones are different, right? So they kind of remind you more of a larger jewel case. So I bet you these are called jewel cases. The ones that CDs come in, right? Um, so this one has not been upgraded in any way. So I think this might have been pulled off of VHS, but don't quote me on that. All I know is that when I watched it, it's quite blurry. All right. So if you watch a Blu-ray and then you watch this one afterwards, you're going to go, "Oh my God, what a difference!" Right? So this is Blu-ray, but like I said, I'm all about being able to watch the film, right? So if I can't afford, let's say, the Arrow, the deluxe set, to watch it, and they've upgraded the film to make it look clearer and make it look nicer or whatever. If I can't afford to get that, does it mean that I shouldn't be able to watch Street Fighter because I can only find it on a crappy DVD? Screw that. I found I even paid like $3 for it, right? And it also, beside it, was Dragon Princess, which is another Chiba film where he plays the father of this girl, and the father gets attacked, and he ends up eventually dying in the film. So Sonny Chiba is kind of only in the first part of the film, and then the woman takes over. Uh, uh, she decides to take revenge on the people that killed her father, right? So this is quite a fun film to watch as well. And it also, has a lead character who's female that goes kick some ass, which is one of my favorite types of films. So I quite enjoyed this film, but actually it was worse than this film when it comes to visually watching this film. This film is extremely blurry, all right? It's a very blurry film, all right? And this one is blurry, but not half as blurry as this one was. And I still enjoyed this film, even though it was blurry, all right? Um, and both of these are basically, from the 70s or whatever. This one's from 1976, all right? And this one is directed by Yutaka Kohiro. So two Japanese films. This is a famous film. It's one of the all-time great um, Japanese, martial arts films. Um, and this one isn't bad either. But like I said, they're extremely blurry. So you have to be in the mindset like me that I don't mind watching films on DVD, even blurry ones, if I can have access and watch the film, right? I'd rather have a bad version of the film and be able to watch it than not have a version of it at all and have no access to it, right? So anyway, so here's two put out by Platinum Disc Corporation back, I don't know when these were, 1981, 1974. So 19, but it doesn't say when these actual cases were put out, or these particular ones were put out. But if you haven't seen the Street Fighter, pick it up. It's pretty good. Sonny Chiba plays a pretty good character there. You don't give a crap about him, but you're watching the movie anyways. He goes, kicks butt, and gets captured one time, and he doesn't care about his fellow man, right? So, he's kind of like an anti-hero, right? So, all right, and so the last um, film box set that I picked up was this one, and it's again on DVD. On DVD. So it's basically the Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry Ultimate Collector's Edition. All right. So this is the definitive edition on DVD before all the Blu-rays and everything came out for this, right? So it's like a nice box set. All right, and this is all the stuff it has. It has actually all of the stuff in it still. Usually, a lot of times when you buy box sets. Now, I bought this. This was a private sale. I bought this for $10. Private sale off of Facebook Marketplace, and I got this for $10. Now, I have the first three films, all right, which are the three important films, but I didn't have the last two films, and I was having trouble finding the last two films. Um, So when this came up on Facebook Marketplace, I said, "Cool, I'll buy this, and then I can get rid of all the individual DVDs that I have and have it in one nice box set." Unfortunately, this guy didn't protect his media, like I keep going on about, and it's in black. It's a black box set, and it's not a thick box set like you got with Men in Black, like hard cardboard. It's more of the soft, cheaper cardboard. Anyways, it's got dings all over it, right? On the corners. There's a little bit of white rubbing here from pulling it on and off the shelf all the time. You get a bit of that on the sides as well. But overall, it's still in very good condition. And for $10, you can't go wrong, right? So basically, it has all five films of it, which are basically Dirty Harry. All right, I wrote it down so I can do it quickly. All right, so Dirty Harry. All right, and that's about the Zodiac Killer. It's the first one. It's a great film. It's one of the best films of the '70s. Um, that iconic character, Harry Callahan or Dirty Harry, was set in stone in the first one where he goes and kills that serial killer, or sorry, yeah, the Zodiac Killer who ransoms the city of San Francisco by kidnapping a whole bunch of kids and a bus driver on a bus when they were dropping kids off after school, right? So he's a real slime bag, right? So, um, and Harry hunts him down and kills him, right? So that was the start, and then the second film is came out in 1973, and it's called Magnum Force, and that's the one that you had David Soul in, the guy from Starsky and Hutch. He plays a California California highway patrolman. They're all on motorcycles. They remind me of, and uh, he goes on to Starsky and Hutch. But there was also another. It reminded me of Chips. I don't know if you remember that show from the '70s, that TV show from the '70s called Chips. Anyways, but so David Soul is one of these three or four motorcycle cops who just go around and target, bad guys like mob bosses and everything. They just shoot them down on the street, right? And then Harry Callahan goes investigates them and exposes it, and ends up being there's a captain above them that coordinates it and everything, right? So that's the second film, um, Magnum Force. The third film is called The Enforcer, and that one he partners up with Tyne Daly, and Tyne Daly. So you're seeing a pattern here, right? So Tyne Daly, all right, which ends up being his partner in the third film, she goes on to be a star in another '70s or '80s, no, late '70s, early '80s police drama starring two female cops, and she was one of the female cops. Tyne Daly was, and it was called Cagney and Lacey, and that was a pretty good. I watched that when I was a kid, right? So that was pretty good. I watched Starsky and Hutch as a kid, and I watched Cagney and Lacey as a kid, so that was cool. And that was a bit of a brown waking, ignorant intellectual, groundbreaking TV show because it starred two women in predominantly male roles um, on a mainstream network uh, TV series, right? So called Cagney and Lacey. If you haven't seen that series, maybe look it up. Maybe you'll like it, right? So anyway, so she's with Harry Callahan in this film, and this is about the Revolutionary Strike Force something or other group of terrorists who uh, end up going on to Alcatraz because Alcatraz has been shut down, and they go on Alcatraz, and they're terrorizing the city of San Francisco, and Harry Callahan goes and takes care of them with Tyne Daly, right? So it's quite a fun film as well. So those are the three core films, and then they kind of left the Dirty Harry series, and Clint Eastwood went on to other things, right? So in between, he was doing some westerns as well, like The Outlaw Josie Wales, I think was around that time. But there was a few westerns that he was doing. Pale Rider was another one. Um, those type of films, as well as the Dirty Harry films, right? So, and then they decided to revisit it in what was the year in 1983, and he did Sudden Impact, all right, which stars Sandra Locke, all right, which he would go on to do, the Any Which Way But Loose, Every Which Way But Can set of films or whatever, right? But in this film, she and her sister are gang raped, and she moves away from I think it's San Francisco, um, and comes back years later, and I think her sister committed suicide because of it, and she comes back and she turns into a serial killer and goes to kill all the men that ended up raping her and her younger sister or whatever, right? And Harry Callahan investigates to try to find the serial killer that's killing all these men. And anyways, it gets quite uh, intriguing after that. But um, Clint Eastwood's a bit older in the last two films, so I mean he still has that that attitude and that, um, but they don't have as much of the magnetism as those first three films did back in the '70s, right? And then the fifth film came out, and that one was called The Deadpool. That came out in 88. So Sudden Impact came out in 83, all right, which was like 7 years after The Enforcer, this last 70s Dirty Harry. And then it took another 5 years before The Deadpool came out. And Harry Callahan is back investigating what's called the Deadpool, which is a bunch of people in the industry place bets on what famous people, what celebrities are going to die before other celebrities, and you put in a list of however many people, and if you're correct, then you know win the Deadpool or whatever, right? But what's happening is somebody's killing off people that are on a list of these this Deadpool list, right? And this stars Liam Neeson as a director who's directing this this horror film, and it's his list that Harry Callahan and the police department uh, through a reporter come up with this list, and then so he's investigated. And Liam Neeson, as a director, is kind of it's interesting to go back and watch these films because Liam Neeson moved from these all these different kind of films into like action films, right? Like starting with what was that? Taken, starting with Taken, and then he had a whole second career doing these action films afterwards, right? So it was interesting seeing him not in an action role, seeing him as a director with a ponytail and being like all all prima donna shit or whatever, right? So, and another fun thing about the Deadpool was it was one of Jim Carrey's first roles. In fact, they put his name up differently than later in later films. Um, when he changed his the spelling of his name or whatever, right? And he plays this rock star that's in the film as well, and he's one of the first people on the list of the Deadpool, and ends up being murdered, right? So it's interesting seeing Jim Carrey not in his typical comedic role. He's in a serious role where he plays a rock star heroin addict, right? So it's kind of funny watching that as well. So that came out in 1988, and those are the five Dirty Harry films. And they all come in this box set, which is nice. You get the three films, all right, and you get a nice hardcover book, right? A lot of pictures, and it's basically a picture book that goes through each film and shows you the pictures of the stars in each film, right? So when I was speaking about Tyne Daly, there she is there. So she goes on to Cagney and Lacey. Um, and those are the three rogue Chips officers. Um, and one of them is David Soul, who went on to, I mentioned it, I can't remember, Starsky and Hutch, right? So anyway, so that's like a picture book, all right? Then you have the films, all right? So Dirty Harry, the first film, has actually two discs, and it has the special features of Dirty Harry on it. But the other ones are all one disc, it seems. Right? So it kind of looks like that. So there's two of these. So there's six discs altogether. All right. And then you get a box. All right. That has all the extra stuff in it. Right. So you have so actually seven discs because this is the seventh disc. This is basically a documentary on Clint Eastwood. It's called Out of the Shadows. All right. So it comes in its own uh, jewel case. All right. Then you have a personal message from Clint Eastwood on a paper. All right. Then you have the poster. All right. I don't want to really open it up because then I'll have to try to figure out how to refold it again. But that's the poster right there, if you can see that very well. All right. if I can find an image of the poster, I'll put it up here because it's a nice poster. All right. And then you get the fake Harry Callahan badge, right? But they didn't go as far as making this badge like made out of metal or anything. It's basically a sticker, basically an embossed sticker. But then you got his ID on the top. All right. And last in it, you have all the poster cards. All right. So this is Dirty Harry theatrical poster from 1971. This is the Magnum Force theatrical poster from 1973. This is the Enforcer theatrical poster from 1976. See how my hands, I can't keep my hands still. I'm getting old, right? Um, this is Sudden Impact theater poster from 1983. This is the Deadpool from 1988 theatrical poster. All right. And then you have basically telegrams because the the killer from the first film, the Zodiac killer, would send the city of San Francisco telegrams, right? And so now they're giving you these telegrams, but they're kind of like quotes and stuff from Frank Sinatra done by Ted Ashley, right? Here's one, an inner office from Warner Brothers. So I'm not exactly sure the point of these, but interesting. But the theatrical posters are kind of cool in postcard size, right? So you get those in this plastic envelope, right? All right. So everything is intact and included. And now I don't have to find any more of the. I have all the Dirty Harry films on on DVD now. I don't have to. Oops, I forgot one of the. Anyways, I don't want to waste all your time. I'll put that all back together after. Um, so so those are the films. All right. Actually, yeah. So those are the films. So now all we have left is the 20 CDs, and this is the fun part for me because I got really excited when I went to the thrift shop and went up to the shelf and saw all these amazing al- albums on CD that you never see in thrift shops, right? So um, it's a great find when you can find them. It's like finding a Criterion or an Arrow film in the thrift shops as well. You don't see them very often. Criterion more than others. Um, you will find in thrift stores, but and you will find Kino Lorber stuff in thrift stores as well. At least in my area, I found like two or three Kino Lobers and a good 20 um, uh, Criterion collection, but I haven't found any Arrow films or like Masters of Cinema or any of the the European or British um, uh, labels. Um, like boutique labels. I haven't found any of those in thrift shops here, but I have found the most popular ones to find, or the easiest ones to find, are the Criterion collection, and then second is Kino Lorber for some reason in my area. Anyway, so so now we'll go on to the CDs, and you rarely ever find anything that isn't super mainstream, and if it's older, you hardly ever find it. Right? You'll find 80s music, 90s music, but you won't find 70s or 60s music usually in the thrift stores, and usually any 70s or 80s are the mainstream stuff. Like you can find a Def Leppard or a Motley Crue CD pretty easily. You can find from the 90s. You can find like Pearl Jam very easily, Nirvana very easily. Anything that was popular during that time, you'll find in the thrift stores pretty easily. But if you're wanting to find let's say the Beatles or Pink Floyd or all the great bands of the 60s and 70s Rolling Stones. You'll find like 80s Rolling Stones, you'll find 90s Rolling Stones, but you won't find 60s or 70s Rolling Stones. Usually, anyways, every once in a while you may find an individual disc of a classic rock album or a classic pop album from the 60s or 70s, um, or a great jazz album or any of those like um, the great stuff. You don't find that in thrift stores because people usually keep it, right? But every once in a while, somebody will go into their library, whether it's a film library, whether it's a music library, whether it's a book library, and then they'll just say, I don't want this anymore. And they'll go to a thrift store and they'll just drop it off. And I think that's what happened here. I think a guy dropped off his musical collection and uh, and just dropped it all off. And I went into that thrift store. I just happened to be there that day and I went in and I found 20 discs. Now there's probably around 30 really great albums in there, but out of those 30, 10 of them are really scratched up. So that might be the reason why the guy decided to drop it off at the thrift store rather than reselling the stuff. Is some of it was damaged, and he said, "Oh fuck it, I'm just gonna drop it all off." Anyways, and it might have been larger than that, because you don't know when you go into a thrift store, you go and you find some stuff and you go, hey, that's cool, but maybe somebody was there before you and found and took a bunch of stuff and left this stuff. So maybe there was hundreds of CDs there of all this great friggin' music, and I got there and I got at least 20 of them. All right, so let's go through. Well, not 20. There probably a few of them are, like this one is a Canadian album. I doubt that this was in his collection. I'm gonna damage this Dirty Harry thing if I'm not careful because I didn't put it back. So all right, so this is the first one. All right, first CD I found is the Weaker Thans. All right, so this came out in 2003, and the Weaker Thans had four albums that they put out, and they stopped putting out um, in the mid 2000s or whatever. They kind of disbanded or went into a hiatus. All right. So this is basically a digipack. All right, paper. All right, and this is their third album. It's called Reconstruction Site. And if you don't know much about Canadian music, you should pick up the Weaker Thans because they're like an alt rock band, one of the better ones coming out of Canada post 2000. All right, and I've had difficulty finding their CDs, which shouldn't be since I'm in Canada. So this is the first one I found. All right, and I haven't listened to it yet because I just found it. Right, so but basically they're out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and they're kind of like an alt rock band. Right, so if you like alt rock, you'll probably like these guys. Epitaph put this out, and it's in, like I said, it's in a digibook, so I'll show you what I do with digibooks since I don't think I've shown a digibook yet, right? Have I shown a digibook yet? Um, so you can get these off of Amazon as well. So you can get the 6x9 ones for DVDs and Blu-rays, and you can get these ones, which are, what are they, 6x6 or 5x5? Um, I never measured them, but they're basically the size of a CD. All right, and the same principle. You put the CD inside the package. All right, take the plastic strip off, you close it, you flip it over, you get all the air out, and you close it, and then you have it. Now it's protected, all right? So um, these digipacks are, you can't avoid it. You will damage your digipacks when you put them on shelves. If you have a whole bunch of CDs, and most of them are plastic cases, and then you get a paper one like this one, as you're pulling them out, putting them up, as you're adding and taking away from your CD library, if you collect CDs and you're moving them around, you will damage these very easily. A lot easier than, let's say, the snapper cases from the 90s DVDs or whatever, right? You will damage these so easily. All right. So out of all of them, this is the one I would suggest most that you protect if you like to collect CDs, anyways. Um, are these Digipack paper items that they get damaged so easily. So this one I found actually quite undamaged, and that's the reason why I grabbed it. All right, and it was $2. All right, so uh, next up, I think this was probably in that guy's collection because he has a similar taste of music as I do, and this is the Ting Tings, all right? And this is their 2008 album, and it's called "We Started Nothing." And it's true, they didn't start anything. What they did, they were kind of like an homage to those 80s pop punk girl bands from the 80s, like you know uh, Blondie or the Bangles, that kind of pop bouncy kind of stuff. And it's only two people, right? It's Katie White, who does the vocals, and she does a bunch of the instruments that they play. And this is Jules de Martino. It's hard to say his name, and he does drums and things like that, right? So, but basically, they're like an upbeat pop indie kind of band that grabs a hold of you. And probably the song that you've heard of, if you heard anything from these guys, is the song "That's Not My Name," and that is a great video. And that if look that up on YouTube and watch that, and I really enjoyed that. And so when I came across this one, I went great, and I grabbed it for $2. So 2008, the Ting Tings. All right. Um, Next up, in this band I don't know much about. All I know is they're like a garage band from Georgia. All right. They're called Black Lips. All right. And this is called 200 million thousand. All right. And it came out in 2009. And it is also a digipack. So I already have it in a plastic uh, bag. All right. And this band was formed in 1999. And it's basically a garage band. And now, if you know me, I really like garage punk music. And I really like, let's say, vocal jazz by a female singer. I'm not big on male jazz. Um, like I prefer, let's say, Sarah Vaughan over Frank Sinatra, right? Um, um, but I like more modern. Like there's a Canadian. Her name is Molly Johnson. If you've never heard of Molly Johnson, pick and you like jazz, vocal jazz by female, pick up Molly Johnson. She's extremely good. Um, Diane Krall is another one, but people know Diane Krall more than Molly Johnson. But Molly Johnson, I think, is a bit better than Diane Krall. And you have all the the regular vocal jazz artists from the history of jazz, right? So, but those are more modern ones, Canadian ones. The main two in Canada that I've listened to are Diane Krall and Molly Johnson. If you haven't heard those, pick them up. You should enjoy them. All right. Anyway, so that's jazz. This is not jazz. This is garage. And so I picked this one up because they're garage, right? And it's my favorite. So I have not listened to this CD, but I will. I'll be transferring it onto a flash drive and listening to it in my car. And I know I'm probably going to enjoy this a lot. This is their fifth album. So they've had four albums before this, and I haven't been able to find any of them except for this one. And now that I found it, I'm going to listen to it, and I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot. If you've listened to the Black Lips, let me know your opinion on them. Do you think they're good? Do you think what is your opinion on the Black Lips? If you're from Georgia, you probably come across them um, more directly, and maybe you've even seen them live or whatever. I'm not sure, but tell me what you think of Black Lips if you know anything about them. All right, all right. So now this is the first thing I saw when I went into the thrift store, and I went cool, and then beside it, um, hold on, this is just the first. I mixed these up. There it is. All right, so these are the two albums that grabbed me first. All right. So you have the Ramones self-titled album, and you have the Ramones Rocket to Russia, which this is their first and this is their third. Now there is one in between of this, and it's called Leaving Home. I think it's called Leaving Home, isn't it? Yeah, Leaving Home. This one came out in. I write these dates down because I never remember, right? So this one came out in 1974, and this one came out in 1977. And in between, they had a second album called Leaving Home. That one came out, um, I think it was in 75. All right, so I didn't write it down. But they had in the pawn shop, they had this one, and they had Leaving Home, the one that's in between these two albums. But that one was so banged up that I didn't buy it. But these two are in really good condition, so I picked them up. Now I have this one already. I don't have this one. I had this one in my collection, and I don't know where it went to. It disappeared. I can't find it anywhere. So I'm glad I found it again. But I had this one already. But since I got this one, I was going to leave this one behind. So even though I have it already, I'll probably just resell it. But it's good for the video, right? Now the Ramones, obviously you know who the Ramones are. If you don't, if you're young and you don't know music history very much, basically punk rock started with this American band, and it's called the Ramones. All right, and this is probably the first true punk rock album. All right, before it spread from the United States, it went into UK and then went crazy with bands like the Clash and uh, what was the band that did Nevermind the Bollocks? Here comes Sex Pistols, the Sex Pistols, and those guys. In Canada, you had bands like the Forgotten Rebels. If you can find a Forgotten Rebels album, like I don't think it ever came out on CD. Um, Most of their stuff came out on LP, but I don't know how much of their stuff ever came out on CD because I can't find any of it on CD, and it's very difficult to find it on LP. But one of the greatest Canadian punk bands, one of the original punk bands in Canada was called the Forgotten Rebels, and you can't find their shit anywhere, right? So, I mean, I guess you can go on Discogs and pay a ton of money for it, but like going around thrift stores, you can't find the Forgotten Rebels they're called. Anyway, so this is the beginnings of punk rock, okay? And these are two of their more iconic albums. And when I have a huge thousands of CDs that I'm doing episodes on, going through my CD collection because I pulled it off my shelves um, to put in storage because I needed more room for movies. And since I don't listen to the CDs, I transfer them and put them on flash drives and listen to them in my car. I don't really go up to my shelves and pull off these albums to listen to in a CD player or anything, right? So they're more archives, so I can put them in boxes and take them off my shelves, so I can put in movies that I want to watch on those shelves, right? So, um, but uh, in those videos that I'm doing, I think I've done 4 or 5 so far. My CD library, you can look at my channel and see them. They go through all the albums that I have on CD. Um, I've been pointing out what are the greatest albums of all time, in my opinion, and in a lot of other people's opinions as well. But in my opinion, what are my favorite albums of all time that I think are great? And if I was to make a list of, let's say, the 100 greatest albums of all time, they would be in that kind of list. This is one of them. All right, so this would be in that list. I don't think I would put this one in, but this one is an easy entry into the greatest albums of all time list. It's simple, straightforward punk rock music, maybe 3 chords with drums and singing simple lyrics like "I don't want to go down in the basement," "Blitzkrieg Bop," "Beat on the Brat," which is my favorite song on this. They're all very simple and repetitive, but they're the start of punk, and it's so easy to listen to, and it's so fun to listen to, and you can't help but enjoy this album. All right, so this is one of the greatest albums of all time. It's probably the first great, if not just first, punk rock album. All right, and the Ramones are just awesome. All right, so next up, he also, if it's the same guy that put all these stuff, he also liked rap because he had a few rap albums in the collection as well. I'm just assuming that it's all this library is coming all from the same guy because you can see a pattern in the music, right? So, um, if you enjoy rock music and you want to get into punk, if you want to get into rap, well, you would probably um, gravitate towards the Beastie Boys. All right, so the Beastie Boys are a New York band. They originally were a punk band, so you can see the connection, right? So if you enjoyed punk, well, the Beastie Boys were originally a punk band who switched over in the 80s in like 1984, 1985. When did License to Ill come out? Maybe 86, somewhere around there. In the mid 80s, uh, they switched over and they started doing rap. But what was unique with them is they kept that punk rock attitude into rap, right? And they still played their instruments. They were playing in punk in their rap. So they basically are playing kind of like a rockish version of and rapping over it, right? So it's not really as much sampling and that kind of thing that was big during the beginnings of hip hop, where they would sample off of a whole bunch of different records, create a beat, and then do the rap off the beat or whatever, right? Um, they basically were playing their own instruments, right? Um, so ended up they had a song that was called "You Got to Fight for Your Right to Party," and it went from the rap scene in New York, and it just ballooned up and went into the mainstream. It just went everywhere. All right, and it's one of the fundamental reasons why rap left New York. Um, and spread out all across the United States and Canada, and now it's everywhere. Hip hop is everywhere in the world, right? Um, but it was a New York thing at one time, um, more in the black community than in the white community, but it spread out into the white community in New York as well. And then these guys picked up on it, and then they had a huge hit with "You Got to Fight for Your Right to Party." Now, I'm not detracting about other artists. Let's say like Run DMC, who also had a crossover hit at the same time, and that was called "Walk This Way," which was like a rap version of the Aerosmith song, right? And then you had an Anthrax collaboration with what was the name of that group? It's one of my favorite rap groups of all time, Public Enemy. Um, they had I think it was on their first album, which was called "Bum Rush the Show." I think, don't quote me on that, but that Anthrax song that they did with Anthrax, because Public Enemy was more of a harder rap, right? Um, um, and it was more, you know, you could it could be like the heavy metal of rap, you know what I mean, like Public Enemy. So maybe that correlation to Anthrax made sense. So anyway, so you did have other groups that put hip hop on the mainstream, right? You know, in the mainstream. But um, the two that pop into my head easily are the Run DMC "Walk This Way" song and the Beastie Boys "You Got to Fight for Your Right to Party." That brought um, New York hip hop into the mainstream. All right, and people started listening to hip hop more and more, and then it just spread out, went across the country over to LA, and then you had all the gangster rap of you know, the 90s or whatever, and that kind of thing, right? So, and that became mainstream. So this basically is this box set came out in I'm running out of space here. Um, when did this come out? 1999. And basically, it's a greatest hits package along with B sides. You know, because they would put out records, A sides and B sides, and like three or four unreleased tracks at the time that this came out. All right, it's a nice box set, but like I said, what happens if this is all made of paper? What happens if you don't protect it in plastic to keep it in good shape? Is you have that happen to it, right? So you notice it's coming apart. So it's on the shelf, and they're pulling it on and off the shelf. They're moving it around, and it gets damaged, right? So there's a bit of damage to it, all right. But overall, the package is in still really good condition, all right. So um, basically, you have a booklet, a nice booklet. All right, it has their albums on the front, and it has the track listing on the back of the booklet, and inside you have like essays and songs and images and everything else, right? So um, the Beastie Boys kind of reminisce about the songs that are on this and the albums and everything in this booklet, right? So, and it fits nice and snugly into this sleeve here, all right? So this is basically what the whole thing, when you put it all out, looks like, all right? And there's the back. All right, so basically these are all, you know, the albums, the releases of the Beastie Boys, and it comes in two CDs. So altogether, you get a bunch of stuff from all their different albums, and in a nice package. All right, so this came out in 1999, and I did not have this. So, and see, this is what I call a good issue, where you're not putting out a greatest hits or a best of package after the you know, the band has put out like two albums. You know what I mean? I don't understand that. This was put out in '99, and you know they've been putting out music since the mid '80s. So most of their albums are represented on this, and you just take the best or the cream of the crop off of each one of the albums and you put it together on this anthology or best of, right? So it's called The Sound of Science. Beastie Boys anthology, The Sounds of Science. Sounds of Science, if I remember correctly, is a song off of Paul's Boutique, which is their second album. I think it was their second album. All right, so that's the Beastie Boys anthology. All right, and I will be putting this in a plastic bag as well. All right. Next up, which I also think is part of the collection of that one guy, because it would make sense, is "Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me" by The Cure. All right, and this came out in 1987. Um, it's basically The Cure kind of popularized, that gothic look, that gothic rock look. If you listen to The Cure, they're like very depressing. Like Robert Smith is a very depressing guy. All right, he sings about depressing things. The music is very depressing to listen to. All right, and I think this guy liked that style of music because he has The Cure in his, and he has another band that has a similar aesthetic, I guess is the word for it, right? Anyway, so this basically is their seventh album. It's not their best, but it is one of their good albums. Their best album is probably Pornography, and that one came out in like 1982. It was one of their first albums. Now, this band is one of the um, when you speak about 80s music, most of the music that you're going to talk about that is great are done by 70s artists. All right, the 80s seems to be lacking for great 80s bands. All right, you know, bands that you can put up and compare with, let's say, the 60s bands of like the Doors or the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or the Who, that kind of thing, or the great 70s bands, which, like the Doors again or whatever. And, what are some of the great 70s bands? Aerosmith. Uh, Anyways, they're slipping my mind right now, but you get the idea. And then you come to the 80s, and most of the 80s music that you talk about are from uh, groups that started in the late 70s. So it seems like the decade, if you're going to do a decade of music, you should really start, if you're going to do the decade of the 80s, you should start around 1977, 1978. And there's this transition that goes from 77, 78, like Fleetwood Mac, um, Rumors, or whatever that might be. A lot of people argue that that's the last great album, and everything after 77 is crap. I mean, that's what I would hear a lot from people of my dad's generation, right? But you can attribute that to they're getting older and they're not listening to new music. But if you take the time period from the beginnings of rock and roll to 1977, there is you know the the output of that era was really really good. All right, and then you hit the 80s and everything went like The Cure, right? They're like a new wave band, right? Um, you had what are some of the greats? Like Prince. Prince was really good. That funk soul type of dance type of stuff that Prince put out was really good. But again, he's from the late '70s. Michael Jackson, one of the great pop stars of the '80s. His music came out in the late '70s, right when he left the Jackson Five, right? Who else? The Police. So there's a nice, reggae tinged rock and roll band from the 80s that were big in the 80s, but they had like two of their greatest albums came out in the late 70s, right? So many of the groups that were huge in the 80s, the Talking Heads, another one, came out late 70s, right? They all came out in the late 70s. This band as well came out in the late 70s, but everybody considers this band an 80s band, and they contributed to the recognizable cultural visual culture of the 80s. When you think of the 80s, you do think of The Cure, and the more the 80s go away, fall back in time, the more The Cure is considered a greater and greater band. But their disintegration, pornography is probably their greatest album. Anyway, but they kind of went through a new wave phase at the beginning, and then they kind of moved into a goth rock kind of poppy phase, and then at the end of the 80s, they kind of moved into more pop oriented stuff. So they kind of went kind of in a wave, in their music and Robert Smith's taste. But basically, when you saw that the girl walking down the street that had dyed black hair, black makeup, black eyeliner, black lipstick, black fingernail polish, that was because of the influence of Robert Smith and The Cure. All right, that goth look that that became popular in the '80s came from this band and his depressing music and his on-stage presence. So, he would wear black makeup and that kind of thing, right? So they're one of the definitive bands of the 1980s, along with, let's say, the Talking Heads, um, and Joy Division would be another early '80s, but again, they came out in the late '70s, right? So, um, and so New Order, maybe New Order might be a uniquely '80s band. It came out in U2, maybe U2. I think their first album came out after 1980. U2 would probably be one, but they're few and far between. Um, the ones that you can put up really high on a pedestal for great bands of the '80s when you compare, let's say, to the '60s or the '70s, right? But anyways, The Cure is one of the great ones from the '80s. All right. So this one's called "Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me," and it came out in 1987. All right. So that's The Cure. All right. Next up, we're going to go back to punk, right? And when I saw this one, what? You mean you have the Ramones and three of the CDs from the Stooges? Really? And the Stooges were like, they would foreshadow punk. They're a garage band from I think this album came out in '69 and this album came out in '70. Funhouse came out in '70, and then they had a third album called Raw Power, which came out in 1973. So they did these two albums, and then they kind of went on hiatus. They kind of broke up, but then they reformed in a different lineup, still with Iggy Pop as the singer, um, and they did Raw Power in '73. So so they had all three of these albums, and they had um, Iggy Pop's best solo album, which is called Lust for Life. They had that one there as well, and they had a Raw Power as well as these two ones, but those other two were just too badly scratched up to buy them, so I just picked up these two. This is their first album, and um, this one, like this one, is one of the greatest albums of all time. All right, so when you're looking at Iggy Pop, his first band, the Stooges, this is the album that you should get. And then when you go on solo, Lust for Life is the one that you want. Those are the two greatest Iggy Pop albums ever put out. All right, so it's called the Stooges, and actually it's funny because his name in this on this release is called Iggy Stooge, right? So he changed his name to Pop later, I guess, or maybe it was a um, I don't know, a funny thing to put in it. Anyways, I would have to look up, like, investigate that to see what the reason why he was called Iggy Stooge on this first album. Um, anyway, so this would foreshadow this basically. So you knew this guy liked punk rock because he picked up the Stooges, and this is their second album coming out in 1970. But this one is my favorite all-time Stooges album, my favorite um, Iggy Pop album, and it has some of the 1969. It has on. Do you remember that? I Want to Be Your Dog, which was my favorite song off of this album. I always found it quite humorous, thinking about pretending to be a dog with your girlfriend and wanting her to pet you on the head and all that. I found it kind of fun. I mean, there's more sexual implications to that song than that, but that's how I decided to take it. No Fun, We Will Fall, Real Cool Time. Anyways, Little Doll, an amazing album. If you haven't heard this album, one of the greatest albums of all time, pick it up and listen to it. You're going to quite enjoy it. It's simple garage music that foreshadowed the punk of the '70s, right? So, and then you had Funhouse as well. I don't know if I'd put this up in my top 100, but I definitely would put this one up there. And a lot of people put this one up as well. But I find this one more enjoyable because the reason why I like garage and punk music is because it's simple music, right? These are these like DIY guys that are picking up instruments. They don't, they weren't like schooled on how to play them. They just picked them up and experimented with them. They started out with simple chords. They played simple chords. Um, and they put out like an energy that you didn't get from mainstream rock, um, that you did from punk rock, right? Or from garage rock. You had that, that essence, that visceral feel to punk rock and to garage rock that you didn't get in the mainstream rock, right? So, I mean, if you listen to the Stooges and then you listen to Billy Joel, you'll know what I mean, right? Okay. I quite enjoy Billy Joel. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy that type of piano rock as well, Elton John as well, that kind of thing. But it's not the Stooges. Let's put it that way. The Stooges are a whole different animal. All right. So that's two another another great album, another like top albums for here. The Cure. Come on, the Beastie Boys. I mean, where am I getting all this stuff from? How am I getting this in a pawn shop, right? Anyway, so so that's the Stooges. All right. Next up is um, other than probably it takes a nation of millions to hold us down. This and ill License to Ill, Raising Hell, but this one is one of my all-time favorite rap albums. All right, it came out in 1991, and it's called The Low End Theory by a tribe called Quest. And basically, when this hit the music stores, I had a whole new appreciation for rap music. All right, because I was used to listening to let's say the Beastie Boys with that punk rock feel to it, the simple chord structure and all that, and the rapping, and let's say Public Enemy, where they had that really harsh sound to them. Terminator X had a really harsh sound to his DJing, right? And it was meant to be that way. And Chuck D's voice is just amazing, greatest voice in rap, in my opinion. Um, but the music behind a lot of the rap that came out in the mid to late 80s, all right, because the earlier rap, let's say Melly Mel or Grandmaster Flash and those guys, Africa, Bombata before it, were like sample based, right? Where these DJs would have like large collections of albums that they would bring to their shows, and they would sample off these like certain beats, certain sections of different albums. It could be a jazz album, it could be a pop album, it could be any type of album. They just heard that song and they grabbed that beat and then they put it together and they'd make their own music out of it, right? And then MCs would come along and they would take over and they would start rapping later on or whatever, right? But originally it was all the DJs, right? And all those house parties, street parties, and club parties, where these guys would have these huge record collections, right? Anyway, but once the rap started to take over, they would still be sampling, and the DJ would still be the main guy, and then they would have MCs rapping in front of his music, but his music would be the main drawing effect, and then it kind of reversed over time, where the writer of the rap and the singer of the rap or the rapper of the rap, right, started taking over, right, and they would sample, but then the record companies, once hip hop became a little bit more popular and more mainstream, the the record companies and the artists started hearing the beats that they have on their records being put in these songs that are selling, and they're not getting any money for it, so they started suing these rap and hip hop groups for copyright infringement, right? So what happened was you saw a walking away of that style of rap in a lot of ways. And what you saw was them maybe taking one song, maybe a song that had a nice flow to it or whatever, and they would put the chorus of that song um, in the record, and they would rap over the chorus of it. So you'd hear the chorus, and then they would do a rap. It's still going on today. Or they would maybe sample one record and pay the royalties to that one record, and then you would have that simple beat in the background to people rapping. So basically, it went from like this overflow of these DJs that would hear something, and because they had the ear for it, they could create some really awesome beats put together from all these different type of records. That goes out the window, and then you have this basically simple. I mean, it got to the point where people would just use computers and put out a beat in the background and then rap to it. So it turned out not to be music. I mean, in my opinion, it turned out not to be music anymore at all. It's basically like lyrical poetry. Basically, the rapper writes his rap almost like you're writing poetry, and then he raps it over a beat that's in the background. But the beat in the background has no point. He could do it without that beat in the background, and it would still come off in the same way. So the music was very little in a lot of rap later on in let's say the 2000s or the late 90s, mid 90s, or whatever. But they basically went from tons of sampling, tons of mixing, and everything to rappers kind of taking over, and it's the rap that's more important, and the music became less important, but the DJ was still important in the group because he's the one that set the beat, right? But he would have to create his own music because he couldn't sample from other because you get sued, right? So and then it went to basic simple background music, and the rappers are the ones that are doing it, and sometimes you don't even have a DJ anymore, right? Um, and the music kind of went into the background. It was the rap that is important. But in 1991, when this album came out, they did something different, and they basically are musicians as well as hip hop artists. All right, so I don't know if they've sampled much through their discography, but they play their own instruments. Like the Beastie Boys played, their punk instruments. Um, so you had a kind of like a mix of rap and rock, which kind of became even more popular in the new metal scene that came out later, right? With bands like crap. You think I can remember it now? Fred Durst. What was the name of his band? And that band coming out of Los Angeles, the Battle for Los Angeles was one of their albums. What was the name of that group? Um, Rage Against the Machine and Limp Bizkit, right? Those new metal bands that are basically a mix of hard rock and rap. The Beastie Boys kind of foreshadowed that in a way. They had like a punk rock feel to rapping, right? But anyway, so when these guys came out, they took jazz, all right, and they took like a bit of R&B and jazz, and they played those instruments and they put it together, and then they rapped over it. There's like three guys. I think the main guy. What was the main guy? See, when I listen to music, I listen to the music and albums more than I listen to the individual songs. So I do know individual songs, and I will know artists that are in groups, but it's the group that I find important. So what was it Q-Tip? I think it was Q-Tip, wasn't it? Was one of the main rappers on this, and there's a couple other ones, but there's two main rappers in this band, and they flowed off of each other. I mean, like really good, and they had a really mellow feel to the music because it's kind of a jazz oriented, R&B oriented type of music. Now a lot of rap is all R&B, right? It's all R&B, repetitive um, music in the background. So they're still basically doing what they were doing in the late 90s and 2000s. Um, but there's more of a DIY feel to it, I guess, nowadays. I don't listen to a lot of it, so I'm no expert on it. But a lot of the music that comes into my house through my children that is hip hop oriented is a lot of R&B um, background music. This is jazz R&B stuff when it first started. So they were one of the first hip hop groups to mix jazz in with their music because they couldn't sample, right? You couldn't sample all these different records anymore because you're going to get sued, right? So they made up their own music to rap to, and this stuff and A Tribe Called Quest are amazing. All right, they're one of the best. This is one of the greatest hip hop albums and one of the greatest albums of all time, and it came out in 1991. And you should pick it up if you haven't heard it. All right, a great mix of jazz and hip hop together, right? All right. So he also seemed to like Sonic Youth, which basically is noise rock. All right, and this is their best album. Also, another one of the greatest albums of all time, one of the greatest noise rock albums of the 1980s, put to vinyl or put to CD. All right, and this band put this out, and this is their fifth album. It came out in 1988. All right. Now I've listened to this album numerous times, but I have not listened to the catalog of this band. I've just listened to this one. I came across this one. I'm not a huge fan of noise rock, um, but when I do listen to noise rock, this is the album that I listen to. And what happens is, before I put everything on flash drives and I'd actually listen to CDs, it would be, if you have no knowledge of music, then you start learning, right? And you maybe you listen to music on the radio and that's as far as you go, and you'll pick up an album here or there depending on what you hear on the radio, which is good. But some people just love music so much that they end up getting into it, right? And that was me. And then I started, listening to more and more music, expanding more and more. But what would happen is I would always come to the conclusion that there's a one album that by any group, sometimes there's two, but usually there's one album by any group that just stands above their other stuff. All right. I mean, the super great bands and groups and artists will have multiple, right? Um, but usually, a lot of the bands, it's the one album uh, that stands out, right? So for Sonic Youth, it's this one. So I love Sonic Youth, but I have not listened to their discography. I've stopped at this one album, all right, and I'll listen to it. So in the CD era, you would pick up CDs left and right, and there'd be so much music you would go around and you would listen to. So some of the more enjoyable albums that I like listening to, Pink Floyd The Wall, Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. Pink Floyd's one of the greatest groups of all time, so they have multiple albums that you listen to. But let's say the Zombies with Odyssey and Oracle. Let's say the Stooges with their first album. Let's say Iggy Pop with Lust for Life. Let's say what else? Prince with Purple Rain, you know what I mean? That kind of thing where you gravitate towards the one album, um, and that's what you listen to. So once you expand your knowledge, and when you listen to an album and then you go on to the next album, and you continue to listen to different groups and their albums, it may take you 6 months before you end up getting back to an original album that you listened to at the beginning of that, let's say, rotation, right? So So you listen to this album, then you go on, you listen to other albums, and you continue to listen to other albums, and then you go, I haven't listened to, Sonic Youth in a long time, or I haven't listened to the Ramones in a long time. And what's the album that you gravitate towards? Towards the one that is their best album because you've listened to it already and you really enjoyed it. And so you listen to that album, and that's all you need before you move on to the next one. So that's what happened with Sonic Youth with me, is I just kind of listened to this album over and over. I haven't listened to any other ones, but this is one of the greatest albums of all time, and if you haven't listened to it, pick it up. It's one of the greats in what's called noise rock, right? All right. Came out in 1988. All right. So next up, so I'm on the shelf as well. All right. And I'm going, the Ramones, what? The Stooges, what? And then David Bowie. All right. I've already reviewed a bunch of David Bowie's albums, but I have not reviewed these three. All right. Which is the 1972, his greatest album is this one. It's called Ziggy Stardust. All right. It's larger, but everybody calls it Ziggy Stardust. All right, it came out in 1972. All right, his fifth. Then his sixth album, which is it this one? Yes, his sixth album, which is called Aladdin Sane. All right, and then his seventh album, which is a bunch of covers, and it's called Pinups. All right, so this one is probably not one of his greatest, but a lot of people consider this one of the greatest cover albums of all time because this basically so after Aladdin Sane and Ziggy Stardust, um, David Bowie became more mainstream. He kind of hit his peak, well, he hit the mainstream and people loved him, and he blew up basically. And so the record company wanted more stuff from him, but he wasn't putting out more stuff, right? So what to shut the record company up, I guess, or to appease the record company, he put this album out, which is basically like 12 songs of his youth growing up, of songs that he enjoyed listening to growing up, and he did covers of them. So he has Here Comes the Night, Where Have All the Good Times Gone, Friday on My Mind. All right, so it's basically a covers album. But a lot of people consider this one of the greatest cover albums of all time. I like David Bowie. This one came out in 1973, and it's basically his seventh album, but it's not one of my favorite of his albums. This one, which is his fifth, and this is the one that I consider his greatest album, and this can be put on that list of the greatest albums of all time as well. This has songs like 5 Years, Starman, Ziggy Stardust, Suffragette City, Rock and Roll Suicide. It's just a stunning album, and it's the album that probably put him on the map, I think. I mean, he had some albums before this, obviously, but this is the one that put him on the map, I think. And then after he put this one out, upstairs. Okay. Okay. And this. All right. So we'll take a break from here. Yeah. Sorry about that. Had a ring at the door. All right. Um, so then he had, like I said, he had David Bowie's um, Ziggy Stardust, which put him on the map, and then he came out with this one, Aladdin Sane, and this one almost blew up as big or even bigger. I can't remember, but this one had like Aladdin Sane, had Drive-In Saturday, Panic in Detroit, and probably the biggest song off of this one was the Gene Genie, if you remember that song, the Gene Genie. All right, and this basically was his transition away from the Ziggy Stardust into this morph of his. I never understood all the theatrics. When I listen to a musician, I listen to his music. All the theatrics are secondary. If I listen to theatrics and all that kind of stuff, all the image making that they're putting out with it, I wouldn't listen to half the music that I would listen to, right? I mean, um, I listen to uh, what would be a good example? Okay, how about this one? Prince's Purple Rain. All right, I've watched the film. I enjoy the film. I like but I really like Prince's music more than anything else. His persona that he puts forward as this sexual god, you know what I mean? That you saw, if you were around at the time, you'd understand what I'm saying. Look at his, MTV, like When Doves Cry, or other of his videos, and if it was that I was paying attention to, and then I enjoy his music because of that persona. David Bowie, had the same idea, right? He puts things forward, right? He went through these transitions. He was like a bisexual uh, anamorph or whatever, all that stuff. I never got into that kind of thing. I actually just enjoy his music. So, but if I paid attention to that, I probably wouldn't listen to Prince because he's trying to put himself off as this sexual god in all of his his earlier stuff, and then watch When Doves Cry and tell me any different. And it I find it a joke. Basically, all that stuff was like a joke, but it's just marketing basically, right? So what I enjoy is actually his music. So if I listen to Prince, I'm not listening to it because I find the guy like a sexual god or anything like that, or whatever other thing he's trying to put off on it. I'm listening to it because he's a great musician. He's a great singer, right? Let's say Michael Jackson's Bad, right? He's got this leather jacket on, and let's say he's trying to come off as a tough guy, and the guy is like a very small man, right? He's not a large man. Neither is Prince, right? So coming off as a tough guy just doesn't, you know, if that's what I mean, he's not trying to come off as a tough guy. It's the video, right? It dictates that, Beat It or whatever is like, it's a song that if he's going to be in it, he needs to be a tough guy or whatever, right? So, but it doesn't come off very well. So if I'm looking at the marketing, I wouldn't listen to Michael Jackson because he looks foolish, right? So in my opinion, okay. So does Prince look foolish when he's trying to come off as this sexy guy or whatever? Of course, that's probably not marketed towards me. It's probably marketed towards women, maybe. But anyways, so all that, um, it's like a politician. Do you listen to the words he's speaking to you in your ears, or do you watch for what actions he takes, right? So, um, same thing with musicians. Do you look at the glamour? So if I was to take a look at the image rather than the actual music, and the reason why I buy records is because of the image. I think the person's cool, or I think the person is, wow, that's interesting, or whatever. Um, then I would have to agree with that image in order to buy that music, right? Or a lot of artists just look foolish to me doing the things that they do, but that's show business, right? So I don't pay attention to that stuff. I pay attention more to the actual music itself, right? Um, so that's what I enjoy. I really enjoy him, not because of him. I don't. I don't want to know about his personal life or anything like that. I just enjoy his music, all right? And that's what I want to listen to, right? All the other theatrics, whatever. Anyway, so that's David Bowie. Three of his albums in a thrift store. When the hell do you ever find that, right? And now, basically, with The Cure, now we have one of the other most depressing bands on the planet ever, and that's Joy Division. Basically, Ian Curtis wrote some very harrowing lyrics for this band, and that it's down, a little bit harsh type of music and vocals. It's slower, it's melodic, um, but not mellow. It's hard to describe Joy Division. That's the reason why they're so good, right? But basically, if you like depressing music, um, how best to describe Ian Curtis and his writing and his vocals? Okay, here. You ever go? You ever wake up early in the morning, and it's the dead of winter, and you go outside, and all you see is stark nothingness, all white and black. It's almost like seeing a black and white movie because there's no color, because everything's dead, right? And the trees have no leaves on them, all right? And the wind's blowing. That wind that's blowing is bitter cold, and it freezes your nose and lips, all right, and your ears, all right. And it's just a vast landscape of nothingness and white and black, right? And well, if you were to translate that into a vocal, you would have Ian Curtis, all right, and you would have Joy Division's music, right? So they came out with an EP. What was it? I wrote the EP down because I knew I wouldn't remember it. An Ideal for Living, and that one came out in 1978. And it was their first EP, and because they put out that EP, the record companies took notice, and they were signed by a guy, I can't remember his name, and they put out their first album, which was called Unknown Pleasures. So they had two albums, Unknown Pleasures, and then the second album that came out. So Unknown Pleasures came out in 79, 79 or 78. Yeah, 79. And then Closer came out in 1980. Now, between 79 and 80, between their first album and their second album, um, Ian Curtis committed suicide. And so they were working on Closer and they had finished it, but they hadn't put it out, I think, if I remember correctly. And then he committed suicide, and then Closer came out after his death, and that was it for Joy Division. So they only had an EP and two albums, which begs the question is, why do you have the best of Joy Division? I picked this up because it's Joy Division. I'm going to resell it, right? Um, and anybody that loves music loves Joy Division, so I don't think I'll have difficulty selling this. Um, but I would, if you've listened to other videos of mine, you know that I'm of the opinion that if you're going to put out a greatest hits package, you should have at least like 4 or 5 albums that you can get the greatest hits off of, because you can fit onto CD basically almost both of those albums, and that EP you're going to get like 50% of their music put out on a best of. You know what I mean? What's the point? Why? And the reason why these come out is because the record companies, I don't know if it's called laziness or maybe, I don't know, but what they'll do is with older artists is, in the CD days, right now everything's on Spotify, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff, right? But we're talking CDs. This is CD collecting, right? So what they would do is um, they would stop printing their albums, and they would do a greatest hits package or a best of package and put that out instead. So when you're going into a new record store, um, the the companies, unless it's the Beatles or something like that, and they just keep reprinting it and it keeps selling. They think maybe, let's say, Closer Unknown Pleasures won't sell very well, so let's just put out if we're going to put out Joy Division, let's just put out a greatest hits package or a best of um, package, and that's what people can buy instead of their albums. Meanwhile, guys like me don't want greatest hits package; they want the actual albums themselves, right? But if you are going to put out a greatest hits package, then how are you going to get the greatest hits when you only have two albums, right? If you have 5 albums, you take 2 or 3 off of each album that are the great ones. Sometimes an album will come out and they'll only have one great song on it, right? Sometimes you'll have two. Sometimes the whole album is great, right? But but most times it's like one or two songs on the album. So you need like 5 albums before you get enough songs to actually, without coughing to the side of your mouth saying greatest hits package. You know what I mean? It's just a money grab is the only thing that I can think of. Anyways, but this band is not. It's one of the greatest bands of the. Those 2 albums. I would put both of those albums, Unknown Pleasures and Closer, on a top 100 list, or one of the greatest albums of all time. So I picked this one up so I could point Joy Division out to you, and I bought it for $2, and I'll probably be able to sell it for more than that. So, all right, so that's Joy Division. Next up is one of the great Los Angeles punk bands. All right, yet I could never find any of their CDs until now. All right, you could buy them new or whatever, but I don't buy anything new. I rarely buy anything new, right? So I like looking on the secondary market for stuff. And basically, this is the first 3 albums by a band out of Los Angeles, 1980s punk band, late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, they joined. They they joined. They got together in the late 70s and started putting music out in the 80s. And they're called X. All right, so this is one of the great punk bands that I've never listened to because I could never find any of their CDs until now. And there was 3 of them, the first 3 albums. You have Los Angeles, 1980. All right. You have Wild Gift, 1981, and then you have Under the Black, Under the Big Black Sun, 1982. Now, I only know them of reputation because, like I said, I didn't listen to them. But when you're talking about, I don't know if you'd call it second wave punk or what you would call it, but the guys that listened to the original punk artists and enjoyed it and so decided to do punk bands of their own. This is one of the greats of the, let's say, the second wave or whatever, if you can call it a second wave. I might have just invented that, right? Um, mm, and this is their greatest album. So if everything goes the way I think it'll go, and I enjoy punk rock music, this is their best album. All right, which is their first. It's called Los Angeles, a band from Los Angeles called X. Um, and the other 2 are up there, but not as good as their first. So this always makes the list when you if you were to go on Google and let's say what are the greatest punk albums of all time, this one usually makes the list. So this is considered their best, and the other. But I really enjoy punk and garage music, so I'm pretty sure that I'm going to enjoy X. It's just that I could never find any of their music until now, and 3 of their albums all in one. That's how you know that this is probably coming from one collection, right? So you have the Ramones, you have the Stooges, you have X, all right, and then you have like David Bowie, um, which is kind of like pre-punk as well, right? David Bowie and Iggy Pop worked together a lot, right? So there's a correlation between them, and so those are the first 3 albums of Los Angeles, all right. Um, and I should enjoy listening to them. I'm thinking, all right. So now we've come to the final thing. Um, Out of all this stuff, we've come to the final one, all right. And it's these 2 anthology albums by the Beatles, all right. So I have a bunch of Beatles stuff, but I never had these in my collection. Um, this is basically all their best work over 4 CDs or 4 records. All right. And it's the Beatles 1962 to 1966 and the Beatles 1967 to 1970, an anthology of all their best music, right? So a lot of people, instead of buying their albums, will buy these because it's basically a history of the band and all their singles or whatever, all their greatest songs or whatever, right? My dad used to play these in the living room of our house all the time when I was growing up in my teens or whatever, right? So um, that's what I would hear from the living room all the time is Beatles stuff, right? And invariably it would be these 2 ones that he'd be playing, right? So I didn't have them in my collection because I'm not a big collector of anthologies, or I'd rather have the actual albums themselves. And with the Beatles, most of their stuff is great. Probably My argument for the greatest album of all time would be, Sergeant Pepper's, but other people say it's Revolver. Other people say it's, Rubber Soul. All their stuff from the '60s um, is great stuff. And like they're one of the greatest bands of all time, right? So, but my personal favorite is Sergeant Pepper if I was to pick any of them, right? So, I find that one better than all their other ones. All right, so that's all the CDs, all 20 CDs, all 3 box sets, 5 books, and the 7 other films all together in this one long, enjoyable video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will leave a thumbs up. Maybe you'll subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And I'm always doing new videos, right? So um, I hope you liked it. And what'd you think of it? What'd you think of some of the stuff? What do you think of X? I haven't listened to them yet. Have you listened to X? What do you think of those guys, right? That's the one that I'm most interested in listening to because all the rest of the stuff I've listened to. I haven't listened to the Ting Tings album. I've only heard the first song, that song that I mentioned, right? And there are a couple of weaker thans I didn't listen to as well, so that should be interesting. But most of the movies I've watched, and hopefully you enjoyed this. And I'll talk to you in the next video when we'll do another haul, or maybe I'll do something on books or movies or CDs. I know I'm going to be doing another episode of my CD library. I have the 20 CDs right here I pulled out of the box for the next one of that, so that'll probably be my next video. And thank you for listening, and you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you in the next video, and bye for now.